We already looked at the things that kept the United States out, and we know that the United States was very interested in remaining isolationist in this conflict. You see that Woodrow Wilson himself even is going to campaign in 1916 on staying out of the war. In fact, you see right here, who keeps us out of war? This is his campaign truck here. Peace with honor. You see that the American people, when they reelected him, that is exactly what they were wanting. And he is going to be pushing for what's called peace without victory. This is kind of what his entire plan, Wilson's entire plan, will be based around, is that whole idea of peace without victory, meaning that there is no real clear winner, that they will just simply stop fighting and move on with the peace process. It was very idealistic, meaning that it's the best case scenario. Unfortunately, we also know that idealism doesn't always work, especially when Germany was continuing to use unrestricted submarine warfare. Even though they had promised with the Sussex Pledge that they would stop, they didn't. We then intercept that Zimmerman note trying to get Mexico to invade the United States. At this point, Wilson decides it's time to go to war. And in his speech, he said in 1917, when the United States entered, that we were going to war to make the world safe for democracy. That is exactly why he told the American people we were going to war. The Russian Revolution was also going on at this point in time, so Russia had been not only fighting in World War I, or the Great War, but they had also been fighting within their own country against one another over control of that country. So finally in 1917, when Russia had already lost 1 million men, over 1 million men in this war, they decided to back out. This was key. Remember, this happens in 1917, the same year that the United States enters. The fact that Russia pulls out of the war, gives Germany a much greater chance at winning this war, because now Germany will no longer be fighting a two-front war. They can focus all their resources on the Western Front. That was going to be really important. So the fact that Russia pulls out in 1917, the same year the United States enters, was key. The Selective Service Act is going to be what drafts over 3 million troops into the American military. All men were required to register for military service if drafted. So you see here that all of these young men were all standing in line to register and had been drafted. These recruits are going to train for 9 months in the United States before they're finally shipped off. Transportation is going to be a big problem. We are having to get all of our troops from the United States to Europe. The big problem here is going to be that unrestricted submarine warfare that Germany was practicing. So what good is the United States in this war if we can't get our people and our supplies to Europe? So not only does the government step in and begin to control industry, telling them what they can and will make, they are also going to have to come up with a way to get our troops over there. So they're going to use what's called the convoy system. This is where you surround your troop and supply ships with warships that will protect them from those U-boats. That is going to be, it sounds very simplistic, but it worked very well, exactly like they needed it to. Once we get over there, that's what we called our troops going over to Europe to fight over there. Once we get over there, our troops, who were nicknamed the Doughboys, or the AEF, American Expeditionary Force, under the leadership of General John Pershing, they're going to fight very, very well. In the Argonne Forest campaign specifically, you have Alvin York, who you see here on the right, who actually started this war as a conscientious objector, meaning he did not believe in war, who has a life-changing experience and was able to almost single-handedly take out an entire unit of Germans and take them captive. So this was key. He becomes one of the greatest military heroes of World War I, or the Great War. So our troops fight very, very well. Remember, that makes sense too. Our troops had not been in this. Troops in Europe had been fighting since 1914. The United States does not enter this war until 1917. So our troops are fresh and very eager to fight. They'd had no fighting experience yet. So in less than a year, we see an armistice, or a ceasefire, is going to be signed in November of 1918. This is when we are going to celebrate Veterans Day, because they are going to sign this armistice on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour to signify that they very narrowly averted disaster. So again, that's why we celebrate Veterans Day on November 11th every year. That's when that armistice was signed. Now, when this is all said and done, there have been no battles that were actually fought in Germany. This will come back to play an important part when we start looking at signing a peace treaty, because both sides are very angry, or the Allies are very angry that there were no battles fought in Germany and they suffered no real physical destruction of their land, whereas in France they suffered a tremendous amount. Most U.S. soldiers had not traveled more than 50 miles outside of their homeland, outside of their hometowns. So when they go to travel not only 50 miles outside of their hometowns, but overseas, they see things that they could not imagine. They see large cannons, they see zeppelins, which a zeppelin is kind of like a blimp. They have seen machine guns and poison gases and tanks, airplanes. These are all things that were very foreign to them, things they had never seen. So this is going to be quite a culture shock for them. They receive very poor medical care while in the trenches. They suffer from things like shell shock, which is kind of what would happen is the enemy, the night before they would launch an invasion or an attack on their enemies' trenches, they would shell or send bombs and just bomb it all night long so they wouldn't get any sleep. Shell shock is when they would just really suffer from almost having a disconnect from reality after this had happened. And you'll see examples of that throughout history. Trench foot is where these soldiers were standing in these muddy trenches for days on end. Their feet would get wet and never have the opportunity to dry out. That is when the skin, the flesh on their feet would begin to rot. And sometimes these soldiers would lose their feet. This is a really bad problem, was keeping their feet dry. They would also suffer from trench mouth, where their gums would bleed, and they had a lot of rats in the trenches. They had a lot of fleas in the trenches. So these are not clean places, and their medical care was not very good at all. In getting ready for the war here in the United States, we're going to see several organizations. One is the War Industries Board. This is the government agency that was in charge of changing the United States into a war materials producer. So basically, the War Industries Board, they would go from industry to industry and tell them what they would now be required to make. So instead of making pencils, they would make ammunition. Instead of making regular clothes, they make uniforms. So this is going to be really key. So basically, all industry in the United States is now going to be geared for supporting the war effort. We do see a lot of opportunities for women and minorities in World War I because all of the men are fighting overseas. So this is going to give them a lot more opportunities in those factories to be able to work. We see a lot of conservation efforts. Now, during World War I, you need to make note of this. All conservation efforts were voluntary. So the government did not require conservation. The citizens chose to conserve. One example of this are victory gardens. Victory gardens are where citizens on the home front, they grew their own food in their own gardens in order to conserve food so that other food that was grown could be used to feed our soldiers. So these citizens had what were called victory gardens. We see the beginning of daylight savings time. This was in order to, again, conserve our energy and resources. The war is going to be paid for by two different ways. The biggest way are Liberty bonds. A Liberty bond is like a savings bond where you are going to basically give the government money up front and they will pay you back with interest over time. So you would go buy a bond, give them cash. They would give you a certificate that would tell you when it would come due. And that way you would get your money back with interest. So if you bought a $100 bond, you would give them $50 up front and they would give you a certificate. And in a certain amount of time, you could go back and cash that in for your $100. So that was one way that the government helped pay for this war. They did also increase taxes as well. So really, most of the war was paid for with Liberty bonds. This tells you how much the American people supported the war effort and the fact that they were willing to use their money to support it. The Committee on Public Information, one of the big roles that the citizens have in this war was in simply supporting the government and supporting the war effort. So the Committee on Public Information, under the direction of George Creel, is going to be responsible for getting American citizens to support that war effort through various political cartoons and propaganda. It's going to be really important. The whole I Want You campaign that you see here is going to be used during World War I as well, and it's still used. Unfortunately, anytime we're in war, we do start to see some anti-immigrant sentiment, meaning we don't trust some of the immigrants, especially the ones who are from the countries that we are fighting. We are very concerned that they could possibly be spies. So we're going to pass the Espionage and Sedition Act. Anytime you see that word sedition, you need to know that that is going to be targeting speech and what you say. So sedition and say, the Espionage and Sedition Act. It's going to try to stop criticism of the war, stop people from speaking out against it. In the court case Schenck versus the United States, a man by the name of Schenck was trying to encourage men to not register for the draft. He's going to be arrested for this crime. It goes all the way to trial. But in this court case, the U.S. government is going to win. It supported the government's suppression of criticism during times of war because they said we were in a time of clear and present danger. So anytime we're in a war like this, you will see the power of the federal government is going to greatly increase in order to protect its citizens. So here's one example of that First Amendment right being limited during a war. So it's going to, again, the government is going to win that support. African Americans also participate in segregated units during World War I as well, just like in previous wars and in future wars. The Great Migration is going to be when many African Americans are going to leave the South and head north for job opportunities. So within the United States, African Americans that were still here are going to leave the South, move to the North for those job opportunities that were brought about. The question of civil rights is going to come up again, whether or not African Americans should be supporting and fighting for a country that did not recognize their civil rights. Women are also going to be given lots of opportunity by taking those jobs that men had left. So we do see some changes start to come about during this war to various minority groups. We know that the 19th Amendment was passed as a direct correlation to women's support of the war effort during World War I. We see disease reach an epidemic level. For the first time in history, people from all over the world were converging on one area that was mostly in Europe. And when you see this happen, you are going to see that large numbers of people are not only exposed to this disease, but once the war's over, they return to their home countries, taking that disease with them. In this case, that disease was influenza or the flu. The flu outbreak of 1918 spread all over the world, killing almost 500,000 people in the United States. 1 in every 4 citizens in the United States got the flu, and it kills over 500,000 right here in the United States. Worldwide, it kills many more. Upwards of 40 million were killed from the flu. Again, because of that spread of disease, when all of these people come to one area, some of them get it. This was the Spanish flu. Some of them get it. Once they get it, they take those germs home and then spread it very rapidly when they get to their home countries because, again, people did not have any type of immunity to this particular strain of the flu. So this is going to, again, be one of those effects of World War I that we really didn't anticipate, but really had a big impact all over the world.